I'll probably warn you that we're recording, right?
Right.
There we
Okay.
go.
So, hi, this is Amber Sand with the North Dakota Homeschool Association, and I am here with my husband, who is the president of the board, and with Lauren Gideon, who works with education independence and classical conversations. So, I'll have you, Lauren, just introduce yourself and tell us about you and your family and why you're passionate about homeschooling and education independence.
Well, that's a lot. I'd love to. We don't have all day, so I'll try to keep it
Right.
brief. So my name is Lauren Gideon. I am the Director of Government Relations for Classical Conversations, and in my world, I get to work out of this Education Independence Initiative of Classical Conversations. So we can get into that. A little bit about me is I'm a homeschool mom of seven. I'm actually a second generation homeschool family. I was homeschooled through the seventh grade, and then I went to a small private school for high school.
Mm.
I presently I've graduated two kids. I still have five left in my homeschool. We are in the thick of, coming to the end of our year here before too long. We live on a small hobby farm just south of Des Moines in Iowa, and a big passion of my life. Our founder, Lee Bortons, she introduced me to this idea of having an unfragmented worldview where we just try to go about making sure our life choices are in alignment with our convictions. And so a lot of that has to do with, why we homeschool, why we moved out of the city, why we tried to make choices that allow us to live out those convictions. And so naturally in the education space, I I want an unfragmented view of independence in that space too. So it's been a journey of why I'm passionate about this topic through homeschooling, actually. I came to kind of, I think I've always been in love with history a little bit, but it's in that homeschooling space that you get the opportunity to dig a little deeper and dig a little deeper and ask questions and what happened before this. So while I love American history, I actually love the ideas that gave birth to American history. Where did those come from? John Locke and all of those ideas that so that's my passion project. And so I did some things with adult education for a while and homeschooling and then politics, and then all of that kind of merged together into this role that I have with classical conversations.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So I didn't realize you were homeschooled. What state were you in, Lauren?
Yeah, I'm in Iowa and I've always been in Iowa.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
1991 was the first year that I was homeschooled, and it wasn't until after being in the advocacy space that I found out technically, legally, homeschooling wasn't even legal until 1991 in Iowa code. So I am part of the early legal homeschools. Obviously, there was several that came before us that paved the way,
Mhm.
and I think we owe them a huge debt of gratitude.
Mhm.
But I'm just excited to be like, I'm kindergarten in the first year homeschooling was legal.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. I did know that Iowa was one of the last states to legalize it. North Dakota, Iowa, and maybe Michigan, I
I
think.
believe so.
But
Mhm.
yeah, anyway, sorry. Moving on. Thor probably has different questions for you. So,
Well, so education independence. So would you say that the best way to give families more into education independence is just to fund them to do so through the public sector? Is that probably what we're talking about here, or not so much?
It's very interesting that you go straight to the funding argument. I feel like the independence idea obviously is connected to like how did our country to become independent? What are the pathways that we took to become independent? And thinking about all the ways you have to unshackle yourself to become independent. And one of the ways that we can become, the Proverbs talk a lot about how the borrower is slave to the lender. And so funding is a huge way that we can become dependent on outside structures and not even knowing it, because a lot of times we don't consider the opinions, but we also know the scripture talks a lot about ownership. And so with ownership, it comes responsibility. Those are things are kind of part and parcel. And so that is a lot of what I spend my time in is looking through what are all the ways I guess we could be dependent, and then what are all the ways we need to take ownership and responsibility to grant us the independence. One of my favorite parables is the parable of the talents.
Mhm.
And so, thinking through the lens of what God has given us responsibility for is, when we consider both our resources and our responsibilities, sometimes are the same thing, actually. And my family's education is one of those things I like to put in the category of the 10 talents, and that's something that God gave to me, and I have to take ownership. Well, me and my husband, right? We're kind of a team effort. It's something we have to take ownership and responsibility for because we are the ones that give an account. I don't get to say, but the city said, or the state said, or so if I'm going to give an account for this thing, it's incumbent on me to take ownership of it. Consider that final day when God gives an assessment. My ultimate goal is to get a well done, thou good and faithful servant on whatever task He's given me. And so I have a lot of concerns of co-owning those responsibility with interests, especially that do not share my faith.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
That's a 10,000 foot view, right?
Right.
Right. Right. So, yeah, I'm just thinking, so many people they look at, they want to be charitable and they want to be helpful.
Yeah,
So they look at a family that's struggling or they're struggling to educate their kids. So maybe wouldn't it be helpful if, if the public would just help with that education if they
yeah,
choose to save the public sector a bunch of money by taking their
yeah.
kids out so now they don't have to, they're not a burden to the
Right,
taxpayer. So
right.
can't we save them some money and do it more economically by homeschooling them?
Absolutely. So there's a couple different things is what you're talking about too is we have a deeply ingrained paradigm that the state is responsible for the education of children. We think about that going back, we're like, well, that's been around for forever. Actually, it's a little over 100 years where the state took on that responsibility. And so if they're going to say a lot of it had to do with compulsory laws too. If the state is
Mhm.
going to make sure that every kid is in school, they kind of have an obligation to fund it. They have to provide the thing in which they're requiring you to do. And so that is not a new, well, let me put it this way. That is a part of our paradigm, whether we want to realize it or not. It goes back, a lot of people think this is the way it has always been done. I reject that, actually. Um, State education is the new kid on the block, and actually, independent education is the historical normal, if you will. Um, that when our country came to exist, right, all education was parent-owned, parent-directed education. It wasn't until actually we imported a collectivist thinker into New Harmony, Indiana, who wanted to test drive this idea of collectivism. It was communism before communism was a thing, and he wants to try this idea. It didn't work. He's like, I got to get these kids away from their parents. He said the three evils are the family and religion and private property. And so it was his personal mission to erase all those things, and he documented it extensively. And the King of Prussia got his writings. The King of Prussia puts in a first state education system where Horace Mann went and from Massachusetts over to Prussia, imported it back here, and then it slowly starts in Massachusetts, right, and works its way across the country. And that is the end of the 18th, well, end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. So we're talking about a new thing, but we're talking about a paradigm. And now you're saying, isn't it a good thing? Well, the argument was that well, to preserve liberty, you cannot force people to do things in a culture of liberty. So the best thing that we can do is to force the ideas. That was Thomas Jefferson's argument, and it's been changed throughout the time. But education is a good thing. Therefore, the state should force education. Therefore, the state should fund education. And now we have to get to our present day. We're in systems where 90% of the students are in state-owned and funded education systems. So our economies are suffocating under the weight. I don't know what your state budget is, but in Iowa, I hear anywhere from like 53 to 67% of our budget goes into some sort of education bucket. And so now you're getting to the financial obligation. In Iowa, I think the average per pupil funding is like $23,000, which you and I hear that and we're like, holy smokes, I don't even know if I could spend that much money if I tried. But
Right.
but But the state has found a way because governments are great at finding ways to spend money. And so now we're looking at the state is looking back at the independent education market and like, wow, you guys are very frugal. Nice
Right.
job. And you turned out a really good product at a really low cost. And so it would be wise of them to figure out a way that they could copy that and then to market that back to the taxpayer and saying, we found a cost reduced way to educate children even better. The problem is, and you and I know this, we live in this space where parents can educate for pennies compared to what the state can do. And has a lot to do with how invested we are, how we run our kitchen table economics, and what our goals are. And so it's really great idea if the state can pay attention to that. But the thing that makes us amazing at what we're doing is that we're independent, is that we're private. And so there is no way for the state to offer a private product because by definition, anytime the state funds and owns something, it is public. And
Right.
so the same thing that happened to our public schools then by merit of its state captured, state funded will inevitably come into the private sector. So
Mhm.
from an economic paradigm, you're right. They're smart to look at us, but what we know from, oh, I don't know if anybody's been to the DOT or to the post office in the last 50 years, the government will find a great way to be very inefficient and very expensive.
Mhm.
I don't
Right.
even know if that answered your question.
Well,
I think so. I think it
You
did.
can keep asking it in a different way if you
well,
want.
so I guess if maybe homeschooling, if let's just say for the sake of argument that it is a better way, more
Yeah.
economical way to educate, that it's better for the children.
Yeah.
So we'll just put that as our presupposition, and then we'll
Yeah.
move on to if I'm a legislator, why
Yeah.
wouldn't I want to take and get some kids closer to homeschooling? So
Yeah.
let's just fund their homeschooling, and we don't have to do it at 23,000 or 14,000 per student. We'll just give the parents 6,000 per student. We'll
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
only 1,000 per student,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and that'll help them to stay home and get a better education that will more reflect the parents' values.
Right. We hear
And
this
you
from
would
legislators all the time.
absolutely, I would say like is it to every carpenter, every problem is a nail and every solution is a hammer. And to every legislator, every problem it can be fixed with a new law. And so I would say actually from their angle, the math checks on that. If they're trying to reduce state expenditures and we can do it at a lower price, why wouldn't they do that? The problem really has to do with a couple different things. Because they're considering it, and this is a valid concern, is how I think so. The legislator has owned and governed government education since it's existed.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, Unfortunately, it hasn't worked, or they're under a lot of criticism for saying
Right.
Mhm.
whatever the thing that you have done, people should have an alternative. So the question is actually, if the thing that you have isn't working, why wouldn't you fix that instead of looking to co-opt something else? But um, from an economic paradigm, it makes sense that, NERI's published a lot of results saying that homeschooling has produced a significantly better result in a lot of areas. So that makes sense. I think so. If we're looking at that, we're incentivizing people to leave a failing system and we're trying to get them to leave. We think it'll be cheaper for the state and it'll be a better product for them. I think that makes a fairly decent argument. The problem is you and I live in the independent private education economy, and we
Mhm.
actually think it's a pretty awesome space. And
Right.
I actually think that it's not a coincidence that private independent education produces a better result. I actually think it has to do with the fact that it's independent and privately funded. And if you take those two key features away, it might cease to be what it has been.
Mhm.
Uh, the other problem is we talk about the dollar amount is as far as economics go, we live in a market where people are self-funded, self-owned, self-governed. The feedback loop on choices, actions, consequences is really short. Like if I pick out a horrible curriculum, I might feel it within the week, and then I can change.
Mhm.
Uh, every choice I have has a consequence, and I get to feel that in real time.
Mhm.
Um, So that's part of what makes, I think, home education great. And so we live in a paradigm where we're self-owned and self-directed, and I think that is actually producing the fruit. The concern is when you infuse a private market with public dollars, it no longer keeps the qualities that made it what it was to begin with. And so there's a lot of messaging going out that really concerns me. Um, as we promote these things, I was a part of a subcommittee yesterday where a gentleman came in and say, "We are funding the state education program and we want our fair share of that program," right? And I think I'm gonna pick on you, Thor. I think this argument is actually most effective on the dads that are doing a lot of the tax paying because they feel a lot of the pain as that money is taken from them and jumped into this giant collective pot, which now the state owns and not them. That hurts. And so a lot of dads are like, I just don't, I want to quit being stolen from. And
Hmm.
I feel that. My question back to the gentleman in the subcommittee, though, was like, if we normalize that paradigm thinking, my fair share, we're not talking about my fair share of the money that I earned. If you do the math on most of these programs, the math does not check. Right now in Iowa, they want to give a $4,000 refundable tax credit per child.
Mhm.
Um, I've done the math on 3 kids. If you are a median income family, and so you're paying in the median amount for both your income tax and your property tax, and you take the $12,000 refundable tax credit, you could maybe make the claim that 19% of that was your money, while 81% of that is somebody else's money. So my question back to the gentleman in the subcommittee is like, what is your fair share of somebody else's paycheck? Because if you're going to normalize that, that doesn't just change like, tax credit and code and things. We're actually changing our worldview. We're going to say, I am entitled to the work of somebody else for the benefit of my own family. And if you want to keep playing that forward, I pay taxes. So I'm literally probably paying into every state program that there is. We have
Hmm.
SNAP benefits, uh, there's, we have Hawkeye, which is your health care, all these publicly funded programs for all genuine human needs, right?
Hmm.
So if I'm going to say, since I pay into this, I'm entitled to my fair share. I don't know where that path leads. I
Right.
actually think we're normalizing an entitlement paradigm where we are, um, I mean, the extreme version of that is a 100% socialist society where the government takes all our money and then redistributes back to people. And so I just really struggle with this paradigm of dependency, of entitlement, of victimhood. That's another big part of this being normalized. I think the generational consequences of that are catastrophic, and I think history is full of case studies that demonstrate that.
You wouldn't compare like educational savings account to like welfare or anything like that, would you?
Um, I would pair
Oh, you
them back
would.
to the
Oh, you
most
would.
basic forms. The problem is, Thor,
Hmm.
people are like, "Are you saying school choice is like welfare?" And I'm like, because what they'll say is, but you realize in all education is. And
Yeah.
a lot of people are willing to make that leap because, again, it's so normalized in our paradigm. And so
Right.
for a long time, I was actually nervous to out loud say that.
Right.
But
Hmm.
I don't know what other name you have for it when the general public pools their resources and then redistributes that thing.
Right.
I don't know what else you call that.
Hmm.
Well, I suppose it does differ a little bit because there wouldn't be an income test in most educational savings accounts or whatever, so it would just be more of a pure socialism, right?
Right. I mean, public school
Oh,
is, right? It's just like everybody gets the 23, at least in Iowa, $23,000 per pupil funding has nothing to do with needs.
right.
That's why it's such an entitlement risk
Hmm.
is because we're just saying by nature of you existing, you are entitled to this thing. And in Iowa, now this had no chance of passing, but they proposed several of the Democrats in our Senate proposed a change to our Constitution to codify the right to education, which that makes me a little bit like hives because this idea of rights were completely it's revisionist history. We're redefining what words are. Historically, rights were boundaries that you retained, and the government's going to protect other people from trespassing onto it. You just had the right to retain and keep that which is yours and not to be stolen from or trespass on. You keep your life, your liberty, and your property. It's a barrier. But when we're normalizing this word to say, now you have the right to be entitled to wealth somebody else earned.
Mhm.
Right.
We are redefining justice and all sorts of ideas with this language. And not to mention, it's straight out of the UN, like codifying the rights of the children is specifically a tool of the state to come in and usurp the role of parents.
Right. And that's something that we've been really concerned about as an organization and tried to convey to the people that, look to us for information
Yeah.
when they kind of sometimes will accuse us of being heartless and not wanting to help anyone. We're
Right.
like, we're really trying to put a firewall between you and the
Yeah.
and the government taking away your rights. I don't know if that's the
Yeah,
best
you're
way to say
what
it,
you're talking about is a fence. And fences, like,
but
what does it say? Strong fences build good neighbors. It's completely appropriate, but in order to build a fence, if we're take that in the most literal sense, first you have to own the land to build a fence.
You have to have
And
the
so it's
right to build it.
yeah, so it's very important that it's not heartless to say what you have. Actually, I'll tell you a quote. It's a Chesterton quote. It's on our website. It says, "Oh, might have to summarize. We don't fight because we hate what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us." And
Mhm.
this isn't about being heartless. It's about realizing the task that God's given us, the experience that we have in our homes or with whatever education relationships that we build to fulfill our role. This thing that we have is precious, right?
Mhm.
And if it's precious and it's important, you take responsibility, you take ownership, and you build fences around it. That's how you show what's important and valuable to you. And so I actually advocate for everybody to be able to do that.
Mhm.
Whether you have a lot of resources, if you don't have a lot of resources, I would love to find a way for you to experience the joys and privileges of ownership. And
Mhm.
that's actually why, like, I am a big supporter of philanthropy, like private charitable contributions at Classical Conversations. We have a relationship with Give, Send, Go. And it's like,
Mhm.
let's figure out, we're not tone deaf. We live in a world where people are hurting and there are needs. And what would it be like to actually go about need meeting in a way that Christ prescribes, voluntary, with joy, being generous, taking care of the needs within our families, our churches, our communities in a way that is not with force or compelling people to do that. And so, in order to do that, um, we have to have strong philanthropy pathways. We need to have our churches being willing to understand that education is so important. If a church has like they have usually like a ministry funds for those in need of food needs or shelter needs or clothing needs. Sometimes they have a closet. How can we help them understand that education is one of those things that maybe we could help bear one of each other's burdens because they exist. But when we give to people, we don't want to give in a way that shackles them and takes away their dignity and their ownership. We want to empower them to take responsibility and ownership. And generosity and gift giving is the best way to leave that intact.
Mhm.
I think something that sometimes gets lost in the conversation, though, about, when we get accused of not wanting to help people that are in need,
Yeah.
is there's this false premise there that education has to be expensive, that quality education needs to cost a lot of money. And
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, quality education just comes from a quality relationship. So it comes
Mm,
out of the love for the student and the time. So the cost is really more tied to the time than to and I get it, time costs money,
yeah.
but it's more of a time investment than a monetary investment in expensive curriculums or things like
Yeah.
that. I mean, if we have all
Extracurriculars.
kinds of resources that help people do it for very little money. So,
I was just on a call today when somebody reminded me that they said Abraham Lincoln was homeschooled and he had two books and he
Mhm.
right.
memorized them, right? And they just valued the resources. I actually could kind of relate. And the longer that I homeschool, the less things I ended up using is because you're right. Like education is so much more than the most fancy, expensive things.
Mhm.
or the club. I mean, there's a lot of ways to spend money, and actually, that's a problem because the more the money that gets infused into our market, the more people find ways to spend it, and then we have this problem with inflation
Yep.
that debunks the argument that just don't take these ESAs or whatever your state has. If you just don't take them, you won't be impacted. The
Right.
reality is that inflation hits us all.
Yes, and I was going to bring that up too because
Right.
this is the next devil's advocate question is, well, you or statement would be you just don't have to take
Yeah.
it. We've heard that from a lot of
Yeah.
legislators.
That I actually, there's a couple good conversations on that topic. The one is the inflation, right? So Arizona's everybody goes to Arizona. Like the cost for just the extracurriculars has gone up so much, and I would even say within the co-ops and the communities, the homeschool communities, it's changed also the attitude and the culture because there's so much money. That the consumer mentality in the homeschool space has changed kind of the temperature in the room. People are like, I'll just take my money elsewhere then. I don't have to be personally invested as I had been in the past. So there's that piece. There's other also, um, does it sting to pay into the public school budget while I'm also self-funded in my education? Yes, right? It does. But we've done it for 40 years or however long the homeschooling movement's been around. The thing that is like extra salt and vinegar in that wound is we found a way to pay into the state budget and we found a way to be self-funded. But now you want me to fund other people that want to be homeschooled or private schooled. They want their choice. They want it state funded. Guess who else has to pay into that budget expense that's just been added to all the taxpayers in whatever state you live in, right? So now we're funding that too. And sometimes we're not just funding their textbooks, we're funding their horse lessons and their Lego collections and their espresso machines.
Mhm.
And that comes from like self-funded families are like they're going to count every nickel and dime because it's what we do, it's how we've worked. And so there's just like this overwhelming burden of now shouldering the responsibilities of people that aren't doing that.
Mhm.
And so it's not just change, it's economics changes. I said it's changing the culture as well. I also think it changes us in our ability to our political capital is diminishing. So the self-funded independent private educator, like if we want to negotiate for homeschool freedom or education freedom, if you're private schools, it's like um my argument when I go to the Capitol and saying, this is why you have no business telling a homeschool parent what to do. Here's the deal. They've taken responsibility before God. They're answering to God for what they do. It's their responsibility. Secondly, they're self-funded. They are
Right.
Mhm.
receiving nothing from you. There's no state resources, no state money, so there's no accountability or transparency that they are obligated to return to the state. And on that moral high ground, you have no business to trespass through their fence onto their private property.
Yeah.
And so that argument, we lose that argument if our community as a whole slowly pivots into instead of being independent and private and self-governed, is now mostly either funded or bought into a program. We lose our ability to make that claim.
Mhm.
Right. And then once, people just once they do take the money, it gets harder to not take it. They become dependent
Well,
on.
it is so true. One of my favorite, I think, quotes that illustrates the change of culture in our country is it's attributed to Lincoln, but I don't think he said it. But it was said in the 1950s. It said the philosophy of the classroom in one generation is the philosophy of the government in the next generation. And
Mhm.
so I can kind of see like our schools seem to be on a very progressive edge that's pushing the envelope constantly. And we see like this is how culture is shifting right now. We have a very um, uh, especially in our school system where we'll eat, feed, and sometimes clothe you in somebody else's gender's clothing. But all that aside, right? That is a shaping influence. And so it's no wonder that children grow up and think that my government's here to feed, shelter, clothe, take care of all my needs. That has been not just in the content, but in the structure. The system
Right.
has developed that paradigm. And so the homeschool space, we actually are very independent. It's because what we have been self-governed, self-funded. And so, if we change this paradigm, we might erase the last independent philosophical subgroup of our culture. And I
Mhm.
think it's really important for actually for our whole country. that there is a segment of the culture that still understands the value and virtue of independence.
Hmm.
Right. Right. Um, Something else that back, I guess, can back up a little bit for, if they're that legislator that wants to save money by
Yeah,
this more efficient system. I think when we look at it, I really don't think it would actually save any money because I don't think the existing public school would be willing to take less, even if their enrollment went down.
yeah,
And then number two, if the premise is that we're going to do it more efficiently, well, what is the biggest cost in homeschooling for homeschoolers? Like we referred to earlier, it's time.
yeah.
Well, are we really willing to say that we're going to replace one parent's income
Yeah.
and let them teach their kids at home? Now all of a sudden we're not efficient anymore. So
No.
if you keep going down the
Well,
self or the public funded, it's really just an expansion of public education. It's not private anymore.
it doesn't actually, like, you're right. It doesn't check in the long run, actually, because the first thing you did is you subsidize a whole segment of the education market that wasn't publicly funded before.
Right,
So even if you're funding a per pupil amount of $7,000, $8,000, you're saying this is half of what it costs a public school somebody. If those kids weren't even in the public education economy before, you're not saving any money. That's like
right,
girl math, you know? They're like,
Hmm.
it
right.
was on sale, so I'm saving money. And you're like,
Yeah,
Right.
if you weren't
yeah,
gonna buy it, you're not saving money. So there's that. But here in Iowa, like, so they have to incentivize these programs. Nobody just like here's this public school actually is not going to let go of their money. And
right,
the narrative, right? We got to keep our public schools funded is so strong. So what
right,
happened in Iowa was up until school choice passed, the public school for my children who've never set foot in public school, they received nothing. They never see my children. They receive no funding for them. In order to pass public schools, though, they changed the funding model so that if just by my kids living in that school district, the school district now gets $1,200 per child for
Really?
kids that they're never going to see. I think in Tennessee they're double funding too for the kids that left, and so it does. You're like, so how much money do you have to spend to save money? You're like, I do not think this is actually mathing
right.
out. Which it
Hmm.
actually, I don't think it's about the math or saving money. I think people, like, if you talk to hardcore conservatives that are very concerned about the direction of our country and the direction of our education system, they're like, well, actually, this has nothing to do with that. It's everything that we have to get kids out of schools and we have to get back at the teachers' unions. We have to dismantle the machine that we made. And so at the end of the day, if it, maybe it's not about that. And then
Hmm.
we're going back to what you said is, if that's your goal, to reduce the scope and influence of the government school machine, and now you just bought a whole new segment that was independent and free, you're
Hmm.
actually just expanding that influence, not helping people leave. You're actually capturing new people into that thing. And that's a scary thing is we actually, if you want people out, this is not how you do it.
Right.
And you're also expanding, I mean, you're expanding the funding for schools that you don't believe in their values, like
Yeah.
whether it's the public school that you don't like some of the stuff going on there. Now you're funding families that might be teaching things that are opposed to your beliefs as well. So
Yeah.
sometimes Christians and conservatives forget that we're not all Christians and conservatives. So you're funding somebody to teach
Yeah.
ideologically against what you're trying to teach your kids, which is their right to do. I mean, I'll maintain that family
Yeah.
can and should teach their values, but I don't want to have to pay for it.
Absolutely. I think that is kind of, I actually took a lot of heat recently because I was trying to point that out. Most Christian conservatives are like, I'm fine if my dollars are going to homeschool little Christian homeschools and they're propagating Christian
Right.
virtues. That's great. And so my post was like, actually, we're funding through school choice. Islamic private schools are now publicly funded. Chinese private schools have been publicly funded. And even in Arizona, they have schools dedicated towards queering children that are publicly funded. So it brings up the argument like, why are we compelling people to fund things that violate their conscience? But you know what people say is, well, I'd actually rather give money to the Islamic private school than the mass indoctrination centers that our public schools have become, right? It just like you can't unsee it. And so, and I'm like, I agree. Actually, I've been Iowa Constitution Article 1, Section 3, I think says we're not going to compel people through taxation or tithing to fund places of ministry. But the argument is, have our public schools become religious in their own right? So if you take God or Christianity out of the center of an education, it doesn't stay empty. Something else fills that void. And so the argument has been made that our public school system right now is propagating a religion of secular humanism, which has been identified by the U.S. Supreme Court as a religious entity for purposes of the First Amendment. So everything that you're saying brings us back to the fact that every time you force people to fund education, if education is never neutral, somebody's conscience is going to be violated. And
Right.
so that's why when anytime you fund education, we're doing something is almost contradictory within our own American ideology of compelling people to fund religions that violate their conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're either for me or against me. I mean, it's there is no neutrality. It's
Yeah.
a myth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And something that we consistently try to get across to our members is that this is about control and bringing you back into a system that you left. And like last year, our convention theme was about that, like not submitting again to a yoke of
Yeah.
slavery. And
Yeah.
we try to focus on like, I know that verse is not specifically about
Yeah.
ESAs, and I don't mean to misuse the verse,
Yeah.
but it kind of went with what we had been talking about with ESAs in our legislative
Yeah.
session.
The hard part is, I completely agree with you, but I'm gonna tip my hat to the legislators that are like well intended with these school choice policies. They're
Mhm.
actually strategically looking for pathways that keeps people out of government control. That's why the tax credit option is so popular right now. And
Mhm.
so that's why in our my conversations, you know, like there's control, there's strings, there's regulations, all these words that we throw around. I
Mhm.
kind of compare it to like healthcare. Like you can spend your time chasing symptoms, like putting band-aids on things and never getting to the root cause. The root cause underneath the control problem is he who pays the piper picks the tune. You
Mhm.
Right.
have control over that which you own. If you want to sell your ownership of something, that you lose. You lose some sort of something. You lose control, right?
Right.
Because now the public owns it. And when the public owns it, like in a fiscally conservative paradigm, absolutely you should regulate, have accountability, have transparency, because that's the good stewardship of public money. So it
Right.
kind of makes me scratch my head when homeschoolers saying, I want the public money and I also don't want any accountability and transparency. And you're like,
Right.
so you just want a government that hands out money like candy.
Mhm.
I
Right.
don't want that government.
Right.
No.
Thor says that all the time to people.
People miss that point so often because they're like, well, this isn't going to come with any strings attached. I said, well, then I don't want it because I don't want
Right.
our
Yeah.
tax dollars used to just hand
Yeah.
out to individuals with no accountability. That's just a
It's true.
socialist, terrible idea.
I think we're always like, you have to realize I am the taxpayer and I am the recipient of these things. And some people, I just want to wear one hat or the other. Like, you are your government. Is it South Dakota? Under God, the people rule. That's their motto. It's one of my favorites. We've got a good one here in Iowa too. But so not only are homeschoolers like, they're homeschooling, but they're also citizens of their state, which means they're the governing authority. Most state constitutions have it codified like all power rests in the people or some sort of indicator to that. And so we have to be thinking like we have the responsibility of good governance too. And
Mhm.
so to wrestle through that, I think is really important because again, we are also the responsible governing authority of our state.
Mhm.
Right. Right. That's the other thing that we don't like if we are taking ESA money and for the average taxpayer and the average ESA program is put out, like you pointed out earlier, we're not going to be paying it. We're going to be taking some of our neighbors' money. Not
Yeah,
only are we going to be taking some of our neighbors' money, now we're not helping to pay for the roads and
no,
the courthouse and all the fire and the ambulance and all those other services that we use. So we're it's not just our money that we want a little
right,
bit back of. That's a false way to
right.
think about it, at least in
Right.
my.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I always think about what is liberty and justice for all? Well, it means that if you don't want to pay into the public education system because you're not getting any of the services back, well, neither are the families that are dual income, no kids. So neither
Right.
is grandma down the street. If you want to
Right.
make that argument that nobody receiving benefits should have to pay, I'm for that. Do you know what that means though? It means only the people receiving educational services pay, which means we're basically back to a private system anyway. And
And
Mhm.
so
plan.
if we want to play that out, I think that's what justice is. And I think that's the biblical way to approach something is what is just.
Mhm.
For like this whole conversation has opened up this conversation to fairness and to equity and all things that we used to be very skeptical of. And those things quickly replace what is just. And so making sure we're looking at these issues with a biblical paradigm, calling a bribe, calling justice for what it is, I think gives us clarity to identify some of these fallacies and these arguments.
Mhm. Agreed.
I was just we could go a long time, I think, but we have a position statement, so I just want to let our viewers know if you wouldn't mind, we'll go through. I'll just line
Yeah,
by line. I just so people know where the NDHSA stands on this. So I'll just quickly read through it. The North Dakota Homeschool Association is opposed to any public funding of home education. I mean, some of my questions were just devil's advocate. I didn't really think those things for those of you that didn't catch that. And then the next point is parents are responsible for the education of their children.
yeah,
You just simply state that, like we've been talking. The next point is the recipient of funding is accountable to the source of the funds. So if you're going to take funds from the government, you are now need to be accountable to the government for how you spend those funds or the public, however you want to say that. Freedom to educate according to conscience is more important than funding. So just having the ability to teach what you want to teach and
yeah,
pass your values on to your children is more important than the money. School choice is best accomplished by deregulating and reducing taxes.
yeah.
This allows the parents and communities to come up with what works best for the children that God has entrusted them. They will have more money to work with that can be spent however they see fit. So we're encouraging the legislature that wants to help us to
Yeah.
just reduce the size of government and then reduce our taxes. And then we can use that money, whether it's to educate our kids or to help our aging parents or whatever need we have, we can spend it better than they can. Is the premise
That's
there.
excellent. I think a lot of people think that if you're, they forget that $23,000 or whatever your per pupil funding amount is, that's locked in an economy that you have no say over hardly. And
Right.
so that money like doesn't, it still exists in your economy. If you released it back to the people, or if churches, right? If churches are full of churchgoers that now have like 55% of their tax liability returned to them, the private sector has always demonstrated that it can steward money better than the public sector. So those resources are just locked up, and if we had access to them, what we could accomplish could be very impressive.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
And then our next point it says funding homeschools. So
Yeah,
funding homeschools will reduce school choice because government funded schools are no longer truly private schools. One of the greatest limitations of public school is they have to be accountable to the public over the parent. This is rightly so, as the public bears the burden of the cost, yet it still limits the individual, which we've talked about a lot.
yeah. That is spot on. I applaud you guys for being bold and just saying it like it is. I think there's a temptation right now to be like, again, because people have financial needs, because the economy is what it is, because homeschoolers, like when we had COVID, right? So many people came to the homeschooling space. You're like, this is awesome. They might not have been ready for this degree of heavy economic class. And so
Right.
we don't want to be controversial or divisive. And
Right.
it's actually not that much different than telling people the gospel. Like, in order to tell people the gospel, you might have to share some things that they don't want to hear.
Right.
Like, you're a sinner. You
Mhm.
might be going to hell. Like, we should
Right.
talk about these things. And I
Mhm.
kind of feel like in the education space, I don't mean to equivocate them by any means, but self-ownership and self-governance of your homeschool is so precious. Why wouldn't you tell people about that? Why
Right.
wouldn't you tell them what's at stake? Like you said, the cost is we could completely eliminate and eradicate a school choice option of being a homeschool option if the government funded model captures the private market. There is no private market. All of it's public. Actually, that ruins and eliminates a choice, not
Right.
expands choice.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's just what we're pointing out.
Yeah.
I just
Great
got a
stuff.
couple left. William decided to
This
join
is
us.
our grandson.
Yay! Oh, precious.
Anyways, yeah, there's 2 points left on this. He'll finish
Okay.
All right.
here.
When tax
Sorry.
That's
That's
okay.
fine. That's fine. I wanted to pause so we could talk about the points a little
Yeah.
bit. That's good. When tax dollars are spent for education, inevitably, some taxpayers are indirectly paying for a belief system that they do not believe in, which
Yeah.
again, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the last point is we already have a public school option. Funding private options will eventually deteriorate the private options. Work on fixing problems with the public school, allowing and trusting parents to educate according to how they see fit. So then it just ends with,
Yep.
therefore, be it resolved that the NDHSA is opposed to any public funding of home education.
That's fabulous. And like that, what you're talking about, we have a recent case study, Sweden. It took 20 years for them to implement school choice to completely make homeschooling illegal in that state. Because why would you need to homeschool when you can go to whatever flavor of school that you want? Oh, by the way, they all teach the exact same content, licensed with exact same people or credit or whatever. So you just get to pick like, do you want what color of public school do you want, even though it's all the same? And by the way, no more homeschooling. So it's not like we're sounding the alarm like the sky is falling, like there's no historical precedence for this. We have it happening in real time in places around the world. So taking this stand is completely justified given the threat.
Yeah, isn't that just so, I don't know, just crazy to think about that when school choice is passed and it does well, and all of a sudden your choice is gone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just really,
It's
it's,
really scary for a lot of reasons. Like homeschooling does require sacrifice. There
Mhm.
is a filtering mechanism, and I don't want to say this in like a way that sounds harsh, but if you aren't willing to put some skin in the game, you probably can't homeschool.
Right.
And
yeah.
that has a way of reducing the amount of people that homeschooling. But as you guys know, in some of our left-leaning states, like there's constantly these accusations being thrown at the homeschooling community saying, well, there's probably abuse in there. Now, historically, we've been able to say, like, prove it because that's just not, that doesn't hold up, right? There's no evidence that there's significant amount of abuse. When it happens, full force of the law, you go and you deal. It's a matter of justice, right? But
Mhm.
there's nothing to substantiate the fact that homeschooling explicitly shelters abuse. Now, we change the rules of the game, though. We are now creating incentive structures and these tax credits because we want no oversight, no accountability, that kind of thing. We are creating incentive structures that we could just say in Iowa, as the bill is written, you could get an advance payment, $4,000 per kid. The only thing that you have to do, not be in an ESA program, most people aren't going to be that I'm going to talk about here in a second. All you have to do is pull your kids out of public school. And so if you're thinking about incentivizing bad actors to do bad things, you've created the perfect pipeline for funding for people to do that.
Right.
Mhm.
And so first of all, we have to think about those children. Like, okay, that's a legitimate concern. We cannot incentivize the wrong people. I mean, Minnesota right now is a perfect example of you create incentive structures.
Right.
Not just good people take advantage of those, right? It has a way of attracting all sorts of kinds and crowds. The other
Mhm.
thing is the homeschooling community at large is not going to be able to continue to experience this culture of like these are very invested, sacrificial people that probably have the best interests of their mind if they're in mind for their kids, if they're willing to give up an income and pay out of pocket for this. Uh, that culture could shift very dramatically if we've just created incentive structures for just anybody to join us. And we may not be able to make the claim homeschooling doesn't shelter abuse, because that could change very, very quickly if you incentivize the wrong kinds of families.
Right.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because right now I mean, what would one's incentive be to homeschool their kids other than that they want to spend more time with them
Right.
or they want to give them something that they think is better than what the public option is? I mean, there's
Right.
no other incentive. I mean, unless I
Right.
guess,
Just gonna be, it's gonna be, I mean, right now, actually, the incentive structure, if you're not a loving parent, the incentive structure right now presently favors you could send them right out of your house
Mhm.
Mhm.
a lot of hours of the week for free.
Right.
and
And
not have to
so,
be dumb in a lot of cases. And I mean,
yeah,
Dakota
right. And
recently is working on a bill to give free school lunch to all children,
yeah.
regardless of income. So,
Well, and free breakfast is next that's passed, and they're really worried about the stigma attached to who gets free breakfast and who doesn't. And so we're literally saying all these meals, everything is being provided in one nice government package. And so
right,
Right.
if you
right,
incentivize people that take their kids out of that, I'm not sure what the fallout will be.
I'm not sure either. Yeah, that is concerning. Like these ideas are very familiar to me when I hear them because these are the type of ideas that I grew up with where you view the government as your charitable arm.
Hmm.
It's how you accomplish charity. And so that I feel like the Christian viewpoint should be different, that we accomplish charity in a different way. And
Right.
we are not heartless as an organization. If you reach out to us and you have a felt need that our people show up and they help, and we set
Yeah.
up, we've set up accounts for people at different times and help them with different needs, and we are willing to do that.
right,
That's so important. We have to, I think part of the reason is it's again, it's a cultural mindset that the state took over charity so that we don't have to, either the church community or the family community. And it's kind of, I think, completely appropriate for us to say, no, thank you. God gave that to families and to churches, and we're going to take that back.
Mm-hmm.
So it is incumbent that Christians do take generosity seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of need to kind of do some worldview work on remembering who God tasked with those things so that we can, anytime people get out of the lanes, right? That's when we have corruption and problems.
right, right. And I mean, the model there really, I mean, who does God call to be generous? It's not the corporate church, it's the people that make up the church. And what better way to have accountability within charity than to have the individual giving the dollars deciding where they go? I
To the
mean,
person, right, that was receiving the dollars too. Like love has hands and faces, and that we
right,
can do that in community, and that provides that layer of relationship and love, and that relationship then provides a lot of the appropriateness for generosity that you lose in a cold system that doesn't give people dignity, where they don't have those relationships. And I think that's why it just doesn't work as well as the way that God designed it to work.
Mm-hmm.
right.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us, Lauren. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say. I'm certainly not going to cut you off, but we are nearing an hour and I want to respect your time too. So,
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you having me on. I know that the state homeschool organization is a lot of time the tip of the spear on these issues, so we appreciate the work that you guys have done. I know it's a lot of sacrifice to kind of be that barrier for the homeschool community in your state, and also to take such a courageous stand for private ownership and independent homeschooling, I think is fabulous. And that's basically why we exist too. Our website is chooseeducationindependence.com. We are very much about educating about a philosophy kind of to go along with your advocacy work to say, why would parents want to stand in the gap, to be independent, to resist some of these mechanisms of help? So that's why we exist. We have a newsletter. If you go to our Join Us page, I actually teach 10 seminars over the course of the year. Like, let's wrestle with these ideas because we've already agreed they're countercultural. Sometimes they cause division. And so the best way to handle hard things is in a community of people that are like-minded and that are pursuing truth together. And so that's why we exist. We're not limited to CC families. We actually we love the homeschooling community as a whole. We're even excited for families that choose private education in more school-like contexts. Our main goal is to say, let's create a kind of a hedge of separation between education and the state where parents are owning and directing the education of their families.
right. Yeah. And we love what you're doing.
Well, thanks again. Or anything
Yeah.
else?
I don't think so.
Well, thanks
But
for having me. I love, spitballing with like-minded people that are in these conversations as well. So I appreciate just the opportunity to unpack them again today.